Andrew Gommesen, and it is my privilege to be your host for this edition of the Culture Watch podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope and trust that this will be an encouraging time for you and that you will be able to better articulate your faith in the marketplace that we find ourselves in. I think that this podcast is so important because every political issue is a moral issue, and we need to have a biblical response to the things that go on around us, if for no other reason than to provide the hope of Jesus to people in these dark times. So, without further ado, let's get into news for the week of April 6th. So let's get started today by talking about the No Kings protests that are going on around the country.
Chaos erupting yesterday at No Kings protests across the country as rioters clash with federal agents in defiance of the Trump administration, leading to multiple arrests.
Chanley Painter is here with the very latest. Hi, Chanley.
Hey, good morning. So thousands of No Kings Day protests took place across the country yesterday. Demonstrators saying they were rallying against President Trump's policies, the rising cost of living, and the war in Iran. But in some cities, multiple people were arrested as the clashes between protesters, counter-protesters, and officers turned chaotic. In Denver, police had to use smoke bombs as protests spiraled out of control. And in Portland, masked protesters tackled federal officers outside an ICE facility. In Los Angeles, a tactical alert had to be issued following several clashes. DHS saying that around 1,000 rioters surrounded the federal building there, throwing rocks, bottles, and large concrete blocks, hurting at least 2 officers. Tear gas had to be deployed at one point. And this woman could be seen painting the words, "Kill your local ICE agent," outside the building. The U.S. Attorney for the Central District of California posting this, quote, "To those who were smashing concrete blocks and throwing them at our offices, we have you on video. We will find you and arrest you too. You've been warned." Meantime, some Democrat senators had to also make their voices heard amid their refusal to fully fund DHS.
As Americans, we will never forsake our heritage. We will never accept authoritarianism. We will never accept oligarchy.
Are we going to shut up? Hell no. Are we going to go away? Hell no. We are here to say no kings in the United States of America.
And clashes also erupted outside of Trump's golf courses in California and Florida. Saturday marked the third No Kings Day protest during Trump's second term. Guys.
All right, Chanley Painter, thank you very much.
Thanks, Chanley.
Getting it done out there.
Yeah.
I mean, just accomplishing all kinds of things.
Yeah, getting it done, but let's be clear, not getting it done because it was a grassroots movement. Right. Getting it done because billions of dollars were from liberal groups. But
So I have an honest question for those who oppose the current tactics of ICE. And that is, what is your solution? Because a lot of people are sitting here acting like this is something that is not appropriate at all, that there are no laws on the books concerning immigrants. And the reality is there are. That's the first thing. And the second thing is there is a legal way to become a permanent resident and later a citizen of this country. My sister-in-law is a permanent resident of the United States of America because she went through the process to become a legal immigrant, and later she will pursue citizenship in this great land. And I'm so excited that she's here. She's such a blessing to all of us, not the least of which is my brother, and I've never seen him happier. So I'm extremely grateful for her, and I'm grateful for the process that allowed her to come here legally. So my question to you as liberals would be, what is your solution to this problem? Because supposedly the whole point of this No Kings protest is that Trump is a dictator and he's doing things that are illegal, and so they need to stop him from using his position as a position of violence. Yet, for these protests, you have people writing things like, "Kill your local ICE agent," and making other violent threats. And here's the deal. One of the people who I heard protesting at one of these protests said the way they're going to stop him is through impeachment. Which, first of all, he's already been impeached twice, which is a first for a presidential candidate. He's already been brought up on charges. He's already been examined for colluding with the Russians, and he's survived all of it. So my question is, how are you going to get him this time? But beyond that, how can you say that he is a king with no allegiance to the Constitution and then say that impeachment's going to stop him? How can you talk about how Trump's going to pay for this in the midterms if in fact he's a king? If he literally was a king, he would stop the midterms from happening. Here's the reality. He's not going to try to stop the midterms from happening. He is the president. And while I might not agree with everything he has done, because let's be real, I don't think anybody should necessarily agree 100% with anything that their leaders have done, because you need to be able to think for yourself and say, well, I may agree with this person overall, but I don't agree with everything, and that's okay. But the other thing I will say here is, do you really want the alternative? I mean, the thing that bothers me the most is that there are some very severely authoritarian things that the Biden administration did while he was in office, and yet they are upset at what they perceive as Donald Trump doing the same thing. I said during the COVID crisis, when Trump was still president, that I did not believe that state or federal governments should take as much authority as they were in locking people out of life, because I said it doesn't matter who is in authority. You do not want them to have ultimate unilateral authority over you, especially when we're in a country that is supposed to be of the people, for the people, and by the people. And you might appreciate what's going on as long as you agreed with the leadership. But the minute you don't agree with the leadership, you're not going to agree with what they're doing, and you're going to call it overreach. So even at that time, when I was just beginning to talk about politics through podcasting, I mentioned how it doesn't matter who's in authority, what party it is. I think that their authority should be limited, because as much authority as possible should be given to the people. The responsibility of government should be to protect the people and to allow them to live lives of liberty on their own, not to define what that liberty is. But see, that goes back to what I've talked about many times on this show as well, which is that liberty takes responsibility. We must be willing to take full responsibility for our actions if we want the liberty to do what we must and what we want to do. You can't have a society where everyone does what they want regardless of how it affects other people and then calls it liberty and expect that to last. You have to have a standard. And there are so many people out there that will say, well, I think that murder is wrong because I believe it's morally wrong. But then you ask them what the basis of that is, and they say, well, it's because everybody knows that it's wrong. But the reality is, for us in America, whether we like it or not, that America is based on Judeo-Christian values. So whether you wake up every morning and you read your Bible and you seek it for wisdom because you believe what it says and you follow the Lord of the Bible, or whether you do not, you still benefit from the fact that you were born into a society that by and large represents Judeo-Christian values. And that is why liberty works. Consequently, that's why the Bush administration was not successful in bringing democracy to Iraq. Because the reason that our democratic republic works is because we, by and large, as Americans, are responsible to the Judeo-Christian ethic that was brought to this country by our founding fathers. The whole reason that we came over to the New World was for the right to worship as we ought. And I'm just going to say a little word here about the separation of church and state, because people always talk about it as if the state shouldn't have anything to do with Jesus or religion. But the reality is that when the colonies separated from England, one of the reasons they did was because they did not want to be beholden to the Church of England. They wanted to worship the way they wanted to worship. And so this meant that when they founded the new Democratic Republic, one of the tenets that they had was, we are not going to have a new state church. We're not going to suddenly go from the Church of England to the Church of America, because that would make us no better than what we left. Instead, they said, we're going to give the people the right to worship the way they want to worship. And that's the way it's been in America for almost 250 years. We're coming up on the 250th anniversary of America this year. So what we need to realize is that we need to have a moral grounding in what we do. And I firmly believe that immigration policies are an important part of that. Now, does that mean that I think that everything that ICE does or the government does in the name of casting out immigrants is necessarily correct? No. I think it's okay to hold their feet to the fire and say certain actions that you did were inappropriate and things of that nature if you truly feel that. But getting in the path of a duly sworn government official who is trying to do their duty and then complaining that you were injured or complaining that your loved one died because they were interfering with this action is somewhat hypocritical. And then, like I said, for people in these No Kings protests to turn around and wish violence on the very people that they claim are violent is absolutely ridiculous and makes no sense. What we all need to do is realize that every single person in our country is a human being. Every single person that comes over the border into our country is a human being and should be treated as such. They should be treated humanely. The processes by which they are treated should be evaluated if there are indeed problems. Those should be pointed out. We should be able to discuss these things. We should be able to reform the immigration process. I do think the immigration process is too difficult. I've said for years that the Congress needs to come together and streamline the immigration process in a better way. But they would rather kick the can down the road. This has been a problem for years, and I have a feeling it will be a problem for years to come because of the way that we deal with these issues. And so we need to be honest about what the issues are. We need to be able to discuss them. We need to not throw around buzzwords. Like a lot of liberals say that because they don't agree with the Trump administration, that the Trump are Nazis or the Gestapo. Those terms really need to not be thrown around so lightly. As I've said many times before, the Nazis were awful people. They took people from their homeland and brought them to gas chambers and killed them. That is the reality of what a Nazi is. So what is happening in America, even if you disagree with it, it is not the action of Nazis or the Gestapo. It is simply the actions of someone you disagree with. And I think we would get a lot farther in our discussions and in dealing with these issues if we would realize that it is all right to disagree. And I believe, this sounds weird, but I believe the only way to find common ground is to start out by agreeing to disagree and move on from there. I think that's an important thing for each of us to do. Well, my next story today comes from a topic that has my heartbeat. This is a topic that really was at the front and center of me starting Speaking for Him to begin with, and it has to do with some comments that Isabel Brown made about the importance of people pursuing family as a primary goal as they move through this life.
Well, author and host of the Isabel Brown Show, Isabel Brown, is urging young Americans to prioritize marriage and family. Watch.
If you're not encouraging your children to grow up and have the courage to get married and have kids, more kids than they can afford before they think they're ready, it is high time to start. It is these choices, like deleting our dating apps and quitting birth control pills and saying I do at the altar, that ultimately trickle down into the political policies that we will see save our country.
Well, unsurprisingly, the co-hosts of The View were quick to lash out at her and her comments. Watch.
What is she? What?
So my ultimate beef with this is that it wraps a woman's worth up in her ovaries.
Bottom line, if you're not paying my bills, you don't get to tell me what I do with my uterus.
I think it's just really reckless to be suggesting that people should have children when you now know in this country there's this affordability crisis. So she's advocating for people to be born into poverty, people not being able to feed those children, people not being able to educate those children, and people not being able to house those children.
Wow. Peak elitism. You can only have babies if you're rich. And on The View, I guess. Isabel, have you been surprised by the reaction to your comments?
Oh my goodness, Rachel. Well, first, I'll just say I never expected that this was going to be my Monday. That clip that they reacted to was an answer I gave during a panel discussion that was 30 minutes long at CPAC last week. And it was a very short 2 seconds of the greater conversation that we were having, clearly taken wildly out of context and with the intention to continue pushing the anti-family propaganda on the women of our generation that we saw spewed all over The View yesterday. Elitism is the perfect word to describe just how out of touch these women really are, because most of them are married with children and worth millions upon millions of dollars, but they have the audacity to scream at you like Sunny Hostin did yesterday, wearing an $800 jacket and lying to you, saying that childcare costs $400,000 per year. If that were the case, no one would be able to afford children.
Yes.
But what's really alarming to me is that at the end of the segment, Whoopi Goldberg wrapped everything up by saying, Isabel, how dare you tell women to want to have children? If you're saying that, I'm going to send you back to the past. So it's always about choice for these people until that choice is the beauty and the joy and the purpose of marriage and motherhood, which of course we should be encouraging people to strive for.
Well, you know, in poll after poll after poll, the happiest people in America are women who are married with children. So you have to wonder what that's all about. There's another thing in these polls. Women who make professional sacrifices for the sake of their family also report higher levels of happiness. This is something that the left doesn't want us to talk about. Here are some recent articles, because they're really pushing this like it's like it's a threat to them or something if women want to get married and have children, especially young women. Here are some of the recent headlines. Sooner or later, everyone has to decide whether to give up lazy weekends, disposable income, and overall peace of mind to have a baby instead. So this is all about, that's an article that came out in the New York Times. It says, from Gen Z to Gen X, a pause in the march to the altar or a decision to skip it altogether is becoming more and more common. By the way, I just had a conversation with Mike Johnson, Speaker Johnson, who was just here. He is the product of 2 teenagers who got pregnant in high school, dropped out, and they went on and had 3 more kids after Mike Johnson, and it seems like they're doing pretty okay.
More than okay. Look at him achieving the American dream, and he's just one story of millions upon millions. Look, the truth is, Rachel, we're claiming that we live in the most empowered time for women in all of human history, and yet the only level of empowerment that they are willing to give you is if you forego committing your life to your best friend and bringing new life into the world through the miracle of pregnancy and motherhood. You're right that for women under the age of 35, married moms with kids are 3 times happier, according to a recent study from the Institute for Family Studies, than unmarried childless women. And it's hard to imagine why they're so threatened by the idea of you being happy. But when you really start looking down at the political breakdown of all of this as well, the entire Democrat voter base is completely contingent upon unmarried childless women who clearly are not happy and are looking to fulfill their life through government control rather than the stability of their family.
So here is the interesting thing about all of this, is that I feel like this attitude of not having children and quote unquote forcing women into the idea of childbirth and having a family as a negative has even permeated the church. And a lot of people in the church have been scared to give up their independence. But is there ever anywhere in Scripture where independence is encouraged? I mean, the whole premise of living the Christian life is to be in a family, the family of God. And the family is the foundational part of our society. Our society started with Adam and Eve being joined together in marriage by God for life, to have children, to be fruitful and multiply, and to fill the earth and subdue it. And then several generations later, Noah was told to what? Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And this is something that God never rescinded. Not to mention the fact that in America right now, we are at approximately 1.67 children per fertile woman. The replacement rate is somewhere around 2.1. We are currently not replacing ourselves. And here's the thing. I have literally had pushback from Christians who tell me that you are imposing too much on a woman to say that they should get married and have a family, and you're offending people that want to but can't. But here's what I have to say about that. I desperately want to get married and have a family. I haven't been given that privilege yet. I still pray that God will give me that privilege someday. But regardless of whether I ever get married and have my own children, I'm still responsible to share the message that that is God's ideal for the majority of humanity. And it still bothers me a great deal when people embrace their singleness, not for the service of God, but because I get to do what I want to do on my own schedule in my own way. And that has become a huge issue, I firmly believe, in our society today, is that it's never been easier to be single for the wrong reasons. Now, perhaps have more children than you can afford is a slightly wrong phrase, but I know why people use it. Charlie Kirk used the same phrase. Why does he use it? Because that's what it comes down to for far too many people, is if it's not financially advantageous to me to have children, I shouldn't have children. Obviously, you shouldn't be extremely reckless. If you have zero job and zero income, you shouldn't be sitting there pumping out children. But here's the reality. For the most part, children come one at a time. And if you're truly trusting God for your family, He will provide for you. When my dad married my mom, he did not have the means to care for 12 children. But as he had each child in succession, God provided the means for him to care for those children. We were never rich, okay? But we always had what we needed and a little bit more beside. There may have been some things. As a matter of fact, I know there were some things as a kid where I wished my parents could just go out and buy it for me, because my perception was that other people's parents did that. They probably didn't do it to the degree that I thought, but I was like, if we have less kids, then I could have whatever the new technological advance was whenever I wanted it, because I wouldn't have to compete with all of these children. But you know what the reality is? The reality is that my parents taught me to not always be focused on instant gratification, and that allowed me to realize that when I did receive something that I really wanted, I could enjoy it more, because either A, they made me wait for it for a special time like Christmas or my birthday, or B, I invested my own money in it, so it meant more, because I wasn't trying to simply get what they would give me. Because here's the reality. If they had just given me everything I wanted, I would have not wanted that item for very long. I would have wanted to go to the next thing. So my purpose in sharing this clip is not to say that every single person needs to get married tomorrow. Obviously, that's out of our control. We can't just make somebody marry us. Nor do I think that every single person has to have 12 children. I don't even know if I will ever have any biological children, even if I get married next year. Because I'm already 47, I'll be 48 in a year. And depending on the age of the person that I marry, the odds of us having any children are not that great. But you know what? I can still have a heart for children. I can still have a heart that says that I want to love and honor children. I can still have a heart that says I want to pray for families and support families. And I can still have a heart that says I want to live for other people rather than myself. So my biggest challenge to you is not pop out 2, 3, 4, or any specific number of kids. But my biggest challenge to you is A, what is your attitude about children? Because the Bible says that children are a treasure from the Lord. Psalm 127. And Jesus said, suffer the little children to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. I think I can say with fairly great certainty that there is no greater treasure than a child, because a child is the one thing that you can take with you to heaven. If you think about all your possessions and all the things you've spent a lifetime accumulating, most of those things you will not take with you to the next life. You never see a hearse pulling a U-Haul. But if you have children, not only will they potentially join you in heaven someday if they trust Jesus Christ, but you're also sending them to a future that you will not get to see. Because you're ensuring that the next generation has a population. And if you are a Christian parent who is dedicated to sharing the gospel with them, you're ensuring that the gospel gets continued, that your progeny continues the legacy of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's what this is truly about. Obviously, you can tell that this is one of my greatest passions, and I could go on for another hour just on this topic. I won't do that. But might I encourage you just to simply search your heart and ask God, what is my attitude toward children, and does it match yours? That's the main thing that I'm asking you. And the other thing that I would ask you is to think about the possibility of getting married and think about why you're not. Obviously, I'm not married, and that's due to circumstances beyond my control. And I know there's probably many under the sound of my voice who have the same scenario. But the question we all must ask is, are we making ourselves ready for that kind of opportunity? Am I preparing effectively to be a husband and potentially a father? Because that's what is required of me, preparing to be a husband, to be in a family, is to be prepared to be a leader, because that is the calling that God has placed on a man within the marriage relationship. If you are a woman, are you making yourself available for marriage? Or are you so busy that you couldn't even fit a relationship in? I don't ask this to be negative or snarky. I ask this as an honest question. Because, as I said, it's easy to get busy with our own thing and not to think about the way it affects other things around us. So I hope that this gives you something to think about. I hope you realize that pursuing a family and raising children is a high calling, and that it's something that we need to prepare for, not just hope that it falls out of the sky for us. And trust me, I know from experience that this can be difficult. As a man and an instigator, I feel like I have put myself out there many times and been rejected many times, and it gets difficult to continue in the mindset of desiring this and having the will to make an effort in these regards. But I know that if I'm not willing to instigate and put myself out there and willing to take risks, particularly in this area, then I will not be equipped to lead my family either, because leading a family is about taking risks yourself and about protecting your wife and children. That is the call that God gives to us if He allows us to be married. And again, whether you ever marry or not, I still believe that you can choose to have a pro-life heart. Not just a pro-life stance, but a pro-life heart. And a pro-life heart is one that says that every child is a blessing, and that we need to encourage those who are having children to have more children. And that we need to realize that one of the ways that children become affordable is that we reevaluate needs versus wants. Yes, you may have to give up that 2-stall garage or that in-ground swimming pool. But what you will gain in return, if you choose to have more children and raise them to God's glory, will be a blessing that cannot be matched. All right, well, as you know, over the last several weeks, I've tried to end the show with some encouragement specifically for your Christian walk. And my life was recently touched by the suicide of a friend. And so it's something I've been thinking a lot about lately. And I ran across this clip from Joni Eareckson Tada talking about suicide and her experience with being suicidal and the hope that Jesus gives. This is kind of a lengthy clip, but I didn't want to cut it, and I hope that it will be a blessing to you. I'll play it now, and then I'll be back with some closing thoughts for the episode.
Just this morning, my friend called to let me know that his grandson, a young man back in Florida, hung himself last night. It's so tragic. And it seems to be happening more often these days. I've experienced that numbness, the emotional deadness of just wanting to disappear, just wanting to die. In 1967, when I broke my neck and became a quadriplegic that first month in the hospital, there were plenty of get well cards and visitors, but after a while, the novelty wore off. The get well cards dwindled, as did the visitors, and that's when my hopes also diminished, as doctors confirmed I'd never be able to walk or use my hands. And the idea of a wheelchair for the rest of my life, I just sank into depression. I had these nightmares for the 12 months that I was on a striker frame. A striker frame is kind of like a long, flat canvas frame that you lie on face up, and then after a few hours, they place another canvas frame on top of you, tighten the straps, and then flip you over so that you're face down on the floor for hours. That way you don't get pressure sores. But when I was positioned face down on the striker and people stood over me, people that I couldn't see, I could see their feet, but their feet looked like cloven hooves of demons. I would beg not to be turned face up because I did not want to see their demonic faces. I couldn't eat, I became gaunt, life was passing me by, and the whole nightmarish cycle drove me even deeper into despair. That was it. There was no hope. And I gave in to, I was going to say I gave into my feelings, but I felt nothing. I didn't feel. Nothing moved me inside. I didn't watch TV in the hospital. I just stared at it. I was listless, withdrawn. Things would never get better. When no one was around, I tried to, kill myself by wrenching my head back and forth on the pillow. I wanted to break my neck up at a higher level and so end my existence that way. One night, long after visiting hours, my high school girlfriend ran up the back stairs of the hospital. She snuck past the nurse's station, and she slipped into my room, and she crawled onto my hospital bed. In the dark, I couldn't believe it was her. She snuggled next to me, and I whispered, I said, Jackie, what are you doing here? Shh, she said, and then began to softly sing into my ear. Man of sorrows, what a name for the Son of God who came, ruined sinners to reclaim. Hallelujah, what a Savior. She laid there next to me for a long time, not saying anything. And for me, I can't explain it, but it ended up a turning point. I did not immediately drop thoughts of suicide, but I had this faint flicker of hope. I felt somehow connected to community. Jackie felt like Jesus next to me. And it was this love that made life for me slowly worth living. I began to discover purpose. Mainly, my purpose was wanting to live for my little nieces and nephews. And I found the Bible, at least parts of it, to be helpful. I was no longer isolated. Rather than shoving them away, I started listening. When people ascribed positive meaning to my plight, I slowly placed confidence in God because I just didn't want to go through hell anymore. I wanted to get on with the hope-filled road to life. As I think back on that dark time, actually, hope is everything. One of my friends showed me Romans 15:13, where it says, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace. Not just some or a little joy and peace, but all joy and peace as you trust in him. So I started to wheel down that hope-filled road, trying my best to trust in God, inch by inch. And I've never turned back. And so now, many decades later, when I encounter other people with disabilities who want to end their lives, I understand, I get it. But despair and hopelessness do not have to win the day. So if you know someone who doesn't think life is worth living, first pray for them. I thank God for the prayers of those kind Christians who interceded for me when I wanted to self-destruct. I thank God for the sacrifices they made to lift me up out of social isolation and get me connected to real community. All of it opened the way for me to, inch by inch, trust God. So bless you for tackling this hard subject of suicide. And I pray that these few thoughts might help. May God's favor shine on you as, number one, you connect despairing people to community, real community. Number two, draw them up out of social isolation. Number three, pray for them valiantly. And number four, ascribe hope to their plight. Oh, hope is everything, maybe the best of things, right? And bless you as you do all these things, because you'll be the love of Jesus with skin on.
I have always so appreciated Joni Eareckson Tada and her ministry, Joni and Friends. A really interesting fact is that Joni's life was made into a movie by the Billy Graham Evangelical Association back in 1979. It actually came out 4 days after I was born. I did a review of her movie a few years ago after not having watched it for a long time. And it really hit me how God was already preparing the way for me to be encouraged in my disability by her to pursue my own ministry. So, in a way, the Speaking for Him ministry is a child of the Joni and Friends ministry. It is fruit from her willingness to do what God called her to do. I resonate with so much of her story, not the least of which is having thoughts of suicide. If you've listened to this podcast or the Speaking for Him podcast for any length of time, you probably know that I struggled with my identity as a teenager and that suicide at one point sounded like a good idea. But I'm grateful that God stayed my hand and did not allow me the physical ability or the courage to be able to end my life. And I'm here to say to you today that if you have had feelings of the need to take your life or feelings that you're not important, first of all, I would say reach out for help. Google the suicide prevention hotline. I wish that I had put it in front of me before I did this episode. I did not, so I will include it on the blog post for this episode. But you can also Google it and find it. Call it, get the help that you need, or get help from a church, or reach out to your friends and family. On the flip side, we almost never know when someone is actually suicidal. So one of the keys to helping people is simply being there for them and making sure that you check on your friends so that they know that you love them and so that you can remind them that Jesus loves them. I love what Joni said in the end of that clip, that if you reach out to your friends and family, disabled or not, but specifically she was speaking of the disabled in this clip, and you make them a part of society, you go out of your way to include them, then you will be Jesus to them. You will be Jesus with skin on. So might I encourage you as I wrap up this show today to be Jesus to those around you with skin on. Paul reflects a similar thought when he says, "But you are my epistles, known and read of all men." So the question is, what are people reading in your epistle? What are people reading in my epistle? What a challenge to us, especially as we are coming off of Resurrection Day yesterday. I trust that you had the opportunity to worship the Lord at your local church and to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. Do I realize that because of the resurrection, you and I can live our lives in resurrection power each day? That we have a power that is not of ourselves, and that is given to us freely by the risen Christ. What a privilege we have. Might I encourage you to live in that knowledge and to share that hope with others today. Well, that's all I have to share with you on this edition of the Culture Watch podcast. My hope is that if you've been encouraged by this, you will share this with family and friends. Maybe pick 3 to 5 people who have never heard content from Speaking for Him and let them know what we're doing here, because that would be a huge blessing to me. And also, you can reach out with the contact information that's about to roll at the end of the show with your comments, questions, or concerns. I always like hearing from those who listen. Even if it is criticism, I would encourage you to share it, as long as it is done in a constructive manner. With all that being said, I hope that you have a wonderful week, and that, as always, you keep serving the best of masters.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Your host has been Andrew Gommesen, founder of Speaking for Him. For information on today's show and to leave us comments and voicemails, please visit Speaking for Him. That is speaking numeral for him.blogspot.com. Find Andrew's ministry at speakingforhim.com. That's speaking the number 4 HIM.com. And when you look for us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or all other major podcast platforms, let us know what you think of the podcast by leaving a rating and a review. Intro music for this podcast is provided by Audio Kraken. Transition music is provided by Superstate. Both of these tracks are available free of charge from pond5.com, pond numeral 5.com.